let me tell you something most people don't understand. Sometimes the distance wasn't rejection. Sometimes the silence wasn't the ending. Sometimes the separation was preparation. And if you're listening to this right now, it's because God is saying, you are coming back. What was broken is being rebuilt. What was divided is being aligned. And that reunion you've been praying for, it's closer than it's ever been. You see, life has a way of pulling things apart before it puts them back together, not to destroy them, but to strengthen them. There are moments when you lose people, opportunities, or connections, and you think, I failed. But what if you didn't fail? What if you were being prepared? Because separation isn't always a sign of the end. Sometimes it's a sign that something wasn't ready yet. Separation has a way of making people feel abandoned, like something valuable was taken away as a consequence of failure. But separation is not always correction. Sometimes it is coverage. Sometimes what you lost wasn't removed to hurt you, but to shield you from becoming someone you were never meant to be. When things fell apart, when paths diverged, when communication stopped, it wasn't random or cruel. It was necessary. There are moments when staying would have cost you more than leaving ever did. Protection doesn't always look like comfort. Often, it looks like distance, confusion, and unanswered questions, because growth requires space. And if everything had stayed the same, you might have stayed the same too. You see, not every open door is safe, and not every familiar place is healthy. There are seasons when attachment becomes limitation. What once felt like security can quietly turn into stagnation. Separation interrupts that. It breaks routines, challenges assumptions, and forces you to confront yourself without distractions. That discomfort wasn't designed to destroy you. It was designed to awaken you. When something or someone steps out of your life, it creates a mirror. You begin to see your weaknesses, your dependencies, your fears, and your strengths more clearly. Protection often shows up disguised as loss, because comfort rarely produces clarity. There are things you simply cannot learn while holding on. There are lessons that only arrive when you're standing alone, stripped of validation and applause. Separation teaches you how to stand on your own convictions instead of leaning on borrowed confidence. It teaches you resilience when reassurance is absent. It builds discipline when motivation disappears. If everything had stayed intact, you might never have discovered what you're capable of carrying by yourself. Protection sometimes means removing the crutches so your own strength can finally develop. What felt like isolation was actually preparation in silence. Consider this: some connections break not because they were wrong, but because they were premature. Timing matters. You can meet the right thing at the wrong time and lose it, not because it wasn't meant for you, but because you weren't ready to steward it. Separation protects the future by preventing damage in the present. It pauses what could have been ruined by immaturity, fear, or unhealed wounds. Distance allows refinement. It gives both sides room to grow without constantly triggering old patterns. Protection doesn't rush restoration, it waits for readiness. Separation also protects your identity. When you stay too long in places that don't align with who you're becoming, you start shrinking to fit expectations that no longer match your calling. You begin negotiating your values, softening your standards, and quieting your voice just to maintain peace. Separation stops that erosion. It pulls you out before you forget who you are. It draws a line between who you were and who you are becoming. Sometimes the break is the boundary you were too afraid to set yourself. Protection steps in when self-preservation falls silent. And let's be honest, growth without separation is rare. Pressure reveals, but distance reshapes. When you're removed from what's familiar, you're forced to rebuild from the inside out. Your beliefs get tested. Your priorities get reordered. Your purpose becomes clearer because there's less noise competing for your attention. That season where nothing made sense was not wasted time. It was construction time. The foundation was being reinforced so that when things come back together, they won't collapse under the same weight. Separation wasn't the storm, it was the shelter. Loneliness has a way of being misunderstood. People see it as emptiness, as lack, as something to escape as quickly as possible. But loneliness is often a workshop, not a waiting room. It is where the deepest growth takes place, precisely because there is no one else to lean on. When the crowd disappears and the noise fades, you are left with yourself, your thoughts, your habits, your fears, and your potential. That season wasn't designed to isolate you forever. It was designed to introduce you to who you really are without outside influence. Growth requires honesty, and honesty is hard to find when you're constantly surrounded by voices telling you who to be. In the lonely season, there is no audience to impress and no validation to depend on. That's where discipline is born. You learn to show up without applause, to keep moving without encouragement, to stay consistent when no one is watching. This is where motivation gets replaced by commitment. Anyone can perform when the room is full. Very few can persevere when the room is empty. Loneliness strips away performance and exposes intention. It forces you to ask yourself why you do what you do and whether you believe in your path enough to walk it alone. That internal alignment becomes the backbone of lasting success. This season also sharpens your awareness. Without constant distraction, you begin to notice patterns you ignored before. You recognize the habits that were holding you back and the compromises you were making just to feel connected. Loneliness creates clarity because silence removes illusion. You start hearing your own intuition instead of borrowing other people's opinions. You begin making decisions from conviction rather than pressure. Growth isn't loud, it's deliberate. And the lonely season slows life down just enough for you to make choices that are intentional instead of reactive. There is a certain strength that only develops when no one is coming to rescue you. In that space, you learn problem solving, emotional regulation, and self-trust. You stop outsourcing responsibility for your happiness, your healing, and your progress. You realize that waiting for someone else to save you is a delay you can't afford. Loneliness teaches self-reliance without hardening your heart. It teaches you how to be whole on your own so that future connections become additions, not lifelines. Growth requires independence before interdependence can be healthy. The lonely season also exposes wounds that were hidden by constant interaction. When distractions disappear, unresolved pain rises to the surface. Old memories resurface. Old insecurities speak louder. This is not regression, it's revelation. Healing cannot happen without awareness. Loneliness creates the space for you to confront what you avoided, to feel what you suppressed, and to process what you postponed. Growth demands that you face discomfort instead of numbing it. That season wasn't breaking you down. It was cleaning you out, making room for something stronger and more stable to take root. Most importantly, loneliness teaches you how to sit with yourself without running. It builds emotional maturity, the ability to be present, patient, and grounded even when life feels uncertain. You learn that peace is not dependent on company, and confidence is not dependent on approval. This kind of growth changes how you show up in the world. When connection returns, you no longer cling. When opportunity appears, you don't panic. You move with calm authority, shaped by a season where growth happened quietly, steadily, and without witnesses. Reunion is often imagined as an emotional moment, a sudden return, a dramatic coming together of what was once separated. But reunion is not an event. It is a result. It doesn't happen because of desire alone. It happens because of alignment. Before anything comes back together, it must first come into order. Values, intentions, timing, and purpose all have to line up. Without alignment, reunion would only recreate the same fractures that caused the separation in the first place. What feels like delay is often adjustment, unseen and quiet, happening beneath the surface where lasting change is formed. Alignment begins internally. Before two paths can cross again, each must be clear on where it's going. Confusion creates collision. When people reconnect without direction, old patterns rush back in. The same reactions, the same misunderstandings, the same unresolved issues resurface because nothing fundamental has shifted. Alignment forces introspection. It asks hard questions about responsibility, accountability, and growth. It requires honesty about what went wrong and maturity about what must be different. Reunion without this internal work is just repetition wearing a new disguise. There is also an emotional alignment that must take place. Feelings alone are not enough to sustain a return. Emotions fluctuate, but character stabilizes. Alignment reshapes emotional responses so they are guided by wisdom instead of impulse. It teaches patience where there was once urgency, restraint where there was once reaction. This emotional recalibration ensures that when reconnection happens, it is no longer driven by fear of loss or nostalgia for the past, but by clarity about the future. Alignment slows the pace so decisions are rooted, not rushed. Timing plays a critical role in alignment. Two people can want the same thing, but be in different seasons of readiness. One may have healed while the other is still defensive. One may have grown while the other is still learning. Alignment ensures that neither arrives too early nor too late. It prevents imbalance, where one carries the weight of the whole while the other leans without effort. True reunion requires synchronized growth, not identical journeys, but compatible directions. Timing is not punishment, it is precision. Alignment also demands surrender. Control often blocks restoration because it tries to force outcomes that are not yet prepared to exist. Letting go of the urge to manipulate results creates space for genuine transformation. Alignment cannot be rushed, negotiated, or faked. It is built through consistent choices made in isolation long before reunion becomes visible. What looks like inactivity is often deep internal reordering, where priorities are clarified and intentions are refined. This surrender doesn't weaken the outcome, it strengthens it. When alignment is complete, reunion becomes natural rather than forced. It doesn't require convincing, chasing, or constant reassurance. It flows from shared understanding and mutual readiness. The connection feels steadier, calmer, and more intentional than before. That's because alignment removes desperation and replaces it with certainty. When things come back together in alignment, they are no longer fragile. They are grounded in growth shaped by distance and sustained by clarity rather than circumstance. Faith is most misunderstood when people expect it to show up only after proof arrives. But faith does not wait for confirmation. It moves in the absence of it. When evidence is missing, when signs are quiet, when nothing around you supports what you believe, that is precisely when faith becomes necessary. Anyone can trust what they can see. Anyone can feel confident when outcomes are guaranteed. Faith is different. It stands firm in uncertainty. It commits without contracts. It walks forward when logic advises retreat. This kind of faith is not blind optimism. It is disciplined trust developed through endurance. There are seasons where everything visible contradicts what you feel internally. Circumstances say it's over, but something deeper says it isn't finished. Silence replaces reassurance. Progress seems stalled. In those moments, faith becomes a decision rather than an emotion. You choose to believe without reinforcement. You choose consistency without encouragement. Faith trains you to separate truth from appearances. What you see is temporary. What you believe shapes permanence. When evidence disappears, faith sharpens perception and teaches you to rely on inner conviction instead of external validation. Faith also demands patience, and patience is one of the hardest disciplines to master. Waiting without updates tests resolve. Delays expose doubt. You start questioning timing, purpose, and even your own judgment. But faith is not passive waiting. It is active endurance. It continues to prepare even when there's no sign of arrival. It continues to grow even when results are invisible. This patience builds emotional stamina because you learn how to remain steady without constant reassurance. Faith matures when it survives long periods of uncertainty without collapsing into frustration or fear. There is a cost to faith when evidence is missing. It requires you to let go of control. Control wants guarantees. Faith accepts process. Control demands clarity. Faith operates with trust. Letting go doesn't mean giving up responsibility. It means releasing obsession over outcomes you cannot force. Faith teaches you how to focus on what you can influence. Your character, your consistency, your preparation. When you stop chasing proof and start strengthening discipline, faith becomes grounded rather than fragile. It is no longer reactive, it becomes resilient. Faith also reshapes how you interpret setbacks. Without faith, obstacles look like denial. With faith, they look like refinement. When plans don't unfold as expected, faith reframes delay as development. It allows you to see resistance as training rather than rejection. This shift protects you from becoming bitter or cynical. Instead of internalizing disappointment as failure, faith teaches you to extract lessons and keep moving forward. When evidence is missing, perspective becomes everything. Faith guards perspective by anchoring it to purpose rather than circumstance. Over time, faith builds a quiet confidence that does not depend on immediate outcomes. You stop needing constant signs to stay committed. You stop panicking when progress isn't visible. You learn how to move with calm assurance, knowing that unseen work is still work. Faith doesn't erase doubt. It teaches you how to move despite it. It doesn't eliminate fear. It keeps fear from making decisions. When evidence is missing, faith becomes the bridge between where you are and what is still forming, allowing you to remain steady, prepared, and internally aligned even while the external picture remains incomplete. Forgiveness is often mistaken for weakness, as if releasing resentment somehow erases accountability or excuses harm. But forgiveness is not approval, and it is not forgetting. It is a strategic decision to stop carrying weight that was never meant to be permanent. Holding on to bitterness keeps you tied to the moment that hurt you, anchoring your future to a past wound. Forgiveness breaks that attachment. It frees emotional energy that has been locked in resentment and redirects it toward growth. Without forgiveness, any return, any reunion, any restoration would be poisoned by unresolved pain. Unforgiveness creates barriers that distance cannot heal. Time alone does not resolve resentment. It only hardens it if left unaddressed. Even when people are physically separated, emotional grudges keep conversations unfinished and trust inaccessible. Forgiveness clears the internal clutter that blocks connection. It doesn't reopen doors blindly, but it removes the debris that would cause collapse if those doors ever opened again. Forgiveness prepares the ground, ensuring that if reconnection occurs, it won't be built on silent hostility or buried anger. Forgiveness also requires self-awareness. Often, pain is not just about what was done to you, but about what it triggered within you. Fear, insecurity, abandonment, pride. Forgiving others forces you to examine your own responses, your expectations, and your boundaries. It invites accountability without self-condemnation. You begin to see where you overextended, where you ignored warning signs, or where you relied too heavily on someone else to meet needs you hadn't yet learned to meet yourself. Forgiveness becomes a mirror, revealing growth opportunities rather than replaying blame. There is also forgiveness of self, which is just as critical. Regret can be as heavy as resentment. Replaying past decisions, missed signs, or spoken words keeps you stuck in self-punishment. Forgiving yourself does not deny mistakes. It acknowledges them without letting them define you. Self-forgiveness restores confidence and prevents shame from sabotaging future connections. Without it, even restored relationships carry insecurity and fear of repetition. Forgiveness stabilizes identity so you can re-enter situations with clarity rather than anxiety. Forgiveness does not demand immediate reconciliation. It creates readiness, not obligation. You can forgive without returning, and you can forgive before anyone apologizes. That's because forgiveness is about your internal freedom, not external validation. It removes emotional debt, so you're no longer waiting for someone else's remorse to move forward. This independence strengthens your position. If reunion happens, it happens from strength, not need. If it doesn't, you are still at peace, unburdened by unresolved anger. When forgiveness is complete, it changes the tone of memory. The past no longer controls your emotional reactions. You can reflect without reliving. You can speak without tension. You can listen without defense. Forgiveness unlocks emotional access that bitterness keeps sealed shut. It doesn't guarantee return, but it makes healthy return possible. Without forgiveness, doors may appear open, but they remain functionally closed. With forgiveness, even closed doors no longer imprison you on the wrong side of them. The return is never meant to be a repeat of the past. If it were, there would have been no reason for separation, no need for distance, no season of rebuilding. What comes back is not the same version that left. It carries experience, perspective, and weight. Strength is born from survival, not from comfort. The beginning often starts with excitement and hope, but little understanding. The return carries wisdom earned through loss, patience learned through waiting, and clarity formed through reflection. That difference alone changes everything. In the beginning, things are often fueled by emotion. Passion moves fast, decisions are made quickly, and optimism fills the gaps where maturity hasn't yet developed. That's not failure, that's youth. Whether emotional, spiritual, or relational. But when something returns after distance, it is no longer led by impulse. It is steadier. It knows what it costs to lose. It understands what happens when communication breaks down, when assumptions replace honesty, when effort becomes inconsistent. That awareness strengthens the foundation in ways the beginning never could. The return is stronger because it is intentional. Nothing is taken for granted anymore. Presence becomes deliberate. Words are chosen carefully. Actions are measured. There is less performance and more substance. What once relied on feeling now relies on commitment. Strength grows when people stop operating on autopilot and start moving with purpose. The return carries a seriousness that wasn't present before, not heaviness, but respect for what it took to arrive there again. There is also strength in boundaries that didn't exist in the beginning. Early stages often blur lines in the name of closeness. The return understands that boundaries don't weaken connection, they protect it. Limits are clearer. Expectations are spoken instead of assumed. Space is respected instead of feared. This structure prevents the slow erosion that often destroys promising starts. The return survives because it is built with safeguards the beginning lacked. The return is stronger because it integrates lessons instead of ignoring them. Pain is no longer avoided or minimized, it is understood. Mistakes are acknowledged instead of defended. Growth becomes visible through changed behavior, not just changed language. This kind of strength cannot be faked. It shows up in consistency, in how conflict is handled, in how responsibility is shared. The return doesn't pretend the past didn't happen. It uses it as reinforcement. Most importantly, the return is rooted in choice, not novelty. Beginnings are exciting because they are new. Returns are powerful because they are chosen again with full awareness of the cost. Choosing something after loss requires courage and confidence. It means fear no longer has control. It means trust has been rebuilt internally before being extended externally. That kind of return carries weight, depth, and stability, not because it is perfect, but because it has been tested and refined through absence. So if you've been standing in the in between not where you were, not yet where you're going, understand this: nothing was wasted. The distance had purpose. The silence had meaning. Every lonely night, every unanswered question, every moment you had to keep going without proof was shaping something solid within you. What is returning is not fragile. What is forming is not rushed. It is built on growth, alignment, faith, forgiveness, and strength earned the hard way. You are not being brought back to relive what once was. You are being positioned to experience what it was always meant to become.